I mean, this isn't intended to be an exclusive list of folks.
Right.
We just want to make sure we had a good cross-representation at this initial discussion.
Are we good to start, Liam?
Are good to go.
Okay, awesome. Welcome to the ordinance workshop for January 21st, 2021. This is Jean Marie Caterina. I'm the chair of the ordinance committee. Purpose of the workshop today is we've invited a few developers in town. We know there are many developers in town. We're not trying to discriminate. I was trying to get a cross section of different types of developers with different backgrounds and whatever, to give us some input on the growth management ordinance. We are at actually we're a little past the 10-year review period for the growth management ordinance. So we are working on that. And one of the goals of the council just that we talked about, I think it was Saturday, it seems like years ago now, so much time it seems like it's gone by, is to get this growth management ordinance reviewed, looked at, and out by June 30th. So this is the first step in talking to the development community. There will be more coming up. So please, patience. So I used to teach my Latin classes. Patientia virtus est. Patience is a virtue. Even though I know it's hard sometimes. Basically, the agenda, let me do the call to order, which I just did. A roll call. Do we have Councillor Hamel? Are you here? You're muted, Mr. Hamel.
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
And Mr. Johnson, are you here?
I'm right here, thank you.
And Ms. Caterina is here, so all three members are here. Introductory remarks. Tom, do you mind giving just a real quick? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot. So
I do mind, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
Yeah, this should come as no surprise. I think many of the folks involved in this call, are aware that this is a conversation that's being, had for the last couple of months. Things are starting to ramp up. The town council, through its ordinance committee, is really starting to dig into the growth management ordinance and has been relying on staff and also the long range planning committee to provide some initial commentary on a couple of key areas. And that's probably a good segue into what might be best to guide this discussion. What was sent out to you, and I recommend, Jean Marie, that you perhaps follow this format.
I will.
Are in fact the 5 questions the ordinance committee posed to the long range planning committee. I guess the benefit all of you have is that those were a couple of months ago. Since then, staff provided some analysis and data around to help inform those discussions, and the long range planning committee has offered some initial observations. That's really the extent to where we are. And I will say, I think the ordinance committee was debating when to bring in the development community into this conversation. Early on, we thought that we would get further along and actually have tangible amendments for you to react to. But I think bringing you in now to really be part of the conversation before things are set in stone is probably a preferable route. And so that's exactly why we're here today. So that's kind of the backdrop. I will say that our comprehensive plan is in the final stages. The council's provided some input, staff's making final edits. And so those are on kind of tandem paths. I think the council would prefer getting the comp plan adopted on a similar timeline to recommendations on the GMO coming out to the council. So there's a sensitivity to kind of cadence and sequence here. But undeniably growth and, more importantly, pace of growth, which is what the growth management ordinance focuses on, are issues that are intertwined in the comprehensive plan and in nearly every conversation the council's been having over the last, I'd say, 6 to 9 months. I guess the last thing I'd say is just we have experienced an unprecedented run on the annual allocation of growth permits, so much so 21 days into the new year, advised from Jay that we have actually issued all 135 already this year. And so we appreciate that that's a new phenomenon to you and to us, and that perhaps underscores some urgency for the discussion. And that's something that we don't have the answers on, but I think we're prepared to and interested in getting feedback on those issues as well. So with that, Jean Marie, I would turn it back to you and recommend that you perhaps follow the guidance from the memo.
Yep. And before we do that, just because I'm not sure how many people are watching on YouTube or will be watching separately, I know all of the developers here, but not everyone does. So if we could go around, I'm just going to call on each of you because I'm not sure how you're showing up on various screens, but I'm going to start with Rocky. Rocky, just very briefly, who you are and what development you're working on in case no one knows, which would be amazing, but you're muted.
I think we all are muted.
There you go. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Rocky Risbera Brothers Construction. We're currently working on the Downs primarily, in various projects within the Downs and a few other smaller projects around town. We've been in the development business here in Scarborough for 50 years.
Okay, thank you. Mark, do you mind? Mark O'Leary?
Yeah, local resident doing the cottages at Sawyer. We've been stick builders for 25 years, haven't done a lot. This is our biggest project ever, and it will be the last project ever. You and I had a conversation, Joe, stop laughing.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, Joe, your turn.
I put my foot in my mouth.
Yeah, you
Hi, Joe
did.
Fistacci. I'm doing a Tucker Brook right now. We're finishing that up. Tom just scared me when he says there's no other permits available, or they've allocated the 135 for the rest of the year. There's nothing left. So we probably will be finishing that up and doing our other properties elsewhere. But I've been building, I've done, I think, 4 subdivisions in Scarborough, and we have additional land that we'll be working on to get approved for subdivision.
Great, thanks. Next, Elliot, do you mind?
Thank you. Elliot Chamberlain, owner of Chamberlain Homes, located in Saukable. We've done a number of projects in Scarborough. Primarily, we're now working on the Dunstan Crossing project. Probably for quite a few years, probably have about 4 years left.
Great. Ben, do you mind?
Hi, everybody. Ben Devine. I have developed the last 25 years in Scarborough. We did a lot of retail, Lowe's development over there in the Walmart, but our foray into the residential has been the Beacon at Gateway, 288 units, which has gone great. That's off the Higas Parkway.
Okay, great. And I know it's hi, Cindy. We're just going around introducing. I'll get you in 2 seconds, okay? Carrie, do you mind just introducing yourself briefly for whoever may be looking on YouTube?
Yep, Kerry Anderson, been developing in Scarborough for about 25, 30 years, done a dozen projects, working in Eastern Village on a few.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And Cindy, welcome. If you could just tell us just who you are and what you've been working on. It's just for the public who may not be familiar with who you are.
I'm Cindy Taylor. I'm president of Housing Initiatives of New England Corporation, a nonprofit here in Scarborough located at Bessie Square. And we are, our primary development here in Scarborough was the Bessie School, Bessie Commons, and we have another 40 units under construction right now that will be the second phase to that complex. I've lived here all my life and have worked on a lot of different developments, but those are the 2 that I think are my focus.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, folks. What I would like to do now is I'm going to kind of, I know we've got the agenda that talks about items 5 and 6 here. Has everyone seen that memo that went out that Liam attached? Because what I would like to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to I'm going to be a little school marmish here. Bear with me. That comes naturally to me. And just go around, and I'm going to look at, for example, there's issue 1 on this, and the issue 1 that was asked by us, ordinance to long-range planning, was we wanted input related to the adequacy of the town's annual allocation of growth permits. And I would like to hear from each of you as to your thoughts on that. What's adequate, what's not. I will tell you that I know there are some folks who are like, why do we even have this? But that's not an option. We aren't going to be taking away the growth management ordinance. But I do want to give each of you an opportunity to weigh in with your thoughts, and please be honest, because that's why you're here.
Jean,
Okay.
are you talking about adequate as far as the number of permits or adequate
Yeah.
as far as the process goes?
Well, I'm looking for both, actually. I'd like to start with the, number, but also any of your input on the process. Elliot, are you ready to start with that? Do you want?
Well, I guess I will. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll jump in as far as I'm a little confused, as I meant to spend a lot more time reading the entire ordinance today, but I didn't have as much time as I wanted. There's parts that I read that talk about at the end of the year, if the permits aren't used, they go away. And then I saw a section where they roll over. I guess I'd like a little clarity as to all the years since, I think it's 05 or 07, where we didn't reach the 135. Are those permits being rolled over? And if not, why can't they be?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Chase on expert questions like that.
Sure, happy to answer. So, Elliot, I believe it was 2008, there was an amendment to the growth management ordinance. Prior to 2008, you're right, there was any unused permits rolled over to the following year and sort of just built up, if you will. In 2008, the council amended the ordinance and eliminated the rollover and created the reserve pool. At that time, they created the reserve pool with 215 permits in it. I think that was the number anyway. I'm pretty certain that's correct. And essentially stated that those reserve pool permits could be utilized for certain project types, ostensibly projects that either go through contract zones, projects that are providing at least 50% of the units as affordable, or projects that are taking advantage of density bonuses that are allowed in some zones, be that either the affordable housing or the transfer development rights, the sort of open space preservation density bonuses. And so then that reserve pool from basically 2008 to, I believe it was 2017, set at about that number 215. And then there was based on a lot of discussions that were happening in our department and in town with a lot of interest towards multifamily, there was a concerted discussion or an explicit discussion with council about sort of the market trends and requests that were coming. And it was early in 2017, council saw fit to increase the reserve pool from that 215 number to 500 to enable what was sort of, if you will, in the pipeline or being talked about. So I think that addresses the question, but in short, the rollover is expired. It's no longer, hasn't been part of the ordinance for some 12 years at this point, now 13, I suppose, we're into 2021.
And Jay, of the 500 renewed in 2017, how many still remain?
There are 111 and a half that are unaccounted for. And when I say unaccounted for, there are 2 projects that have been approved and are eligible to pull from that. One is the second phase of the Uplands, which is an affordable senior housing development within the Downs. and the other one is Jocelyn Place, which is South Portland Housing. Again, another affordable senior project here in town.
How many units, Jay, for that?
So they're both actually, let's see, the Uplands it has sort of reserved, if you will, 19 and a half of the growth permits. That's 39 units. And the Jocelyn Place is reserved 30 growth permits, which would be 60 units. Both these projects are the 1 bedroom, less than 750 square foot variety. I think we're all sort of familiar with the fractionalization, so I won't go over that unless anyone wishes I do so.
Yeah, I'm going to do that as a separate topic, Jay.
All right, that comes up later. I forgot.
Yeah. So Elliot, just to go back to you, since you're my original person picking on, what are your thoughts on it, numbers?
I guess one of the struggles I have is if the council, granted, we're going back a ways, I'll just say the town has accepted to have 135 growth permits every year, it's almost impossible to sit here and say, okay, we're just going to have 135 or 100 or pick a number. Why can't we look at an average and say 1 year we might have 180 and 1 year we might have 75 to go with the market? And why can't those rollover permits, or I think those rollover permits should be able to be used, or change, go back to the way it was, like Jay said, back in 05, 07, and have those available.
Jay, can you address his, and Elliot, again, the averaging, because that was that, you outlined something, and the averaging comes from state law, right?
Yeah,
There's
so
minimum with the state law says you can't go below a certain minimum.
correct. Yeah, so state statute says that if you're going to have a growth management ordinance, you don't have to have one, but if a town chooses to have a growth management ordinance, you have to make available at least, it's I have the language right over here. Bear with me. 105% of the annual allocate, or the number of permits that have been issued over the previous 10 years. And when we did the analysis based on the 10 years, and what you'll see in here is, I believe it was 2010 through 2019, so those were the complete years we had before us. We actually came up, the average when you do the 105% was 134 growth permits.
Okay.
That of course includes how we calculate fractional units.
Right, that was based on, correct. And and that does also take into account both the number of reserve permits that were issued in addition to the annual allocation.
Jay, if I understand you right, you're saying the state law says you can't go below that number.
Can't go below. You can go, you can go anywhere above. You just can't go below.
Jean Marie, I would simply suggest that staff, I think, will be uncomfortable kind of responding to input. We're certainly pleased to answer questions for clarity. We're really interested in getting developers' comments about all these matters, but I think hesitant to comment until we see them all.
Yep. All right. Mark O'Leary, comments?
Yeah, the memo started out with a fairness approach, which I think is very, very important. I think when you throw in special projects that not everybody's involved in, it gets a little bit convoluted. To me, if you're building a 1-bedroom apartment, whether it's a duplex style unit, such as what we're doing, or a 16-unit box, it should count the same. I'm a little surprised at the number of units, the fact that all the growth permits are gone for the year. I'm glad I've got what I do for phase 1. But I'm sure that there's some people wondering, where do they go the rest of the year?
Yeah.
So with the number it said itself, to me, if you're going to approve as many units as we have been approved collectively, I think the number has to be bigger.
Okay.
Just from an economical standpoint.
Okay,
The demand is there, and one of the things that everybody's not approaching is the fact that, yes, we're building some senior, but we're not building enough average priced housing that's going to attract younger people.
Mhm.
And want to be the oldest town in the state, we can probably accommodate that. But I don't think that's the overall goal. So I would say if
I'm
we could
sorry.
find more, it would be very advantageous.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Carrie, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, like to ask Jay a question. With respect to the additional 500 units that, or permits rather, that I guess aren't in a rollover state, but in a reserve pool, you said there's 111 and a half of them right now that are unaccounted for. And you said that they can go to units that have fractionalization with respect to the unit sizes and whatnot. Is that still in fact the case? Are there 111 and a half units out there for projects that have fractional or density bonuses, if you will, that can pull from that pool?
So this is where it gets a little complicated, and I think this is one that Councillor Johnson has been pointing out, the difference between our growth permits and our number of units. So that 111 and a half represents the total number of growth permits. Growth permits can be issued in the same fractionalization as our densities are. So potentially at the max, that 111 and a half could be 223 total units, potentially, if they all came in as one bedrooms. So that sort of answers that question. I think, again, the projects that are eligible to draw from the reserve pool need to be approved by planning board through the review process, and the project either needs to have come through as a contract zone, which again, council would have had a say in the matter at that point and blessed the reserve pool. So I think, the Beacon Ben Devine's project is a good example of that one. Project needs to be at least 50% of the units need to be affordable. And I think, Cindy, if I'm not mistaken, your project might be a good example of that one over at Bessie's school, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember if you were reserve or annual, so forgive me if I missed.
No, well, ours are 100% affordable. So we were the recipient of some excess funds that were traded for from other developers who did not want to have affordable on their site. We are building out their portion.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and then the other provision, as I said, are projects that are taking advantage of density bonuses. So in some of our TVC zones, for example, a project can get density bonuses if they provide for some level of affordability or through that development of transfer. So again, I think then, and I'm just trying to provide examples of each project so folks can have a sense. I think Carrier Woods out on Muzzy Road that Rocky did some years ago, there was some density affordability. So I think some of those units came from the reserve and some came from the annual allocation. So those are the projects that are eligible. So just to clarify one point, and then I'll be quiet. It's not just if a project is a multifamily project, it needs to meet these the criteria I just spelled out.
Okay.
Karen, I just want to ask something, Carrie, and then I'm going to go back to you real quickly. Am I picking up? I'm just watching the facial expressions and whatever. Are most of you up on this growth management ordinance, or is it or is this making sense to you, or is this being a little repetitive? Because as Tom said, we don't want to spend a whole lot of time with staff explaining, but I'm also, it's fascinating for me personally to hear you asking that question. Any feedback from the developers?
But, you know, I may come to the table a little differently, but I think that if you start out with the idea of being fair, I think the growth ordinance, the way that it was originally designed, is very innovative and allows for a lot of things. But I think we might need to take another look at it under today's circumstances. Things are a lot different today than they were in 2008, 2005. I'm not saying they're even better there, because right now the costs have gone out of sight, and the idea there's no labor out there. But if we just stay with the planning aspect, I can't sit here in all fairness and talk about what we need in the town, because I'm not sure. From a market standpoint, we've built a lot, but what is the market still lacking in order for us to have a nice mix in our community? We don't want everybody building affordable housing, and we don't want everybody building 1-bedrooms. So, you know, some of these things drive people to those things to make it even for a developer to be able to build it, I guess is what I'm saying. The feasibility is very difficult this time.
Tom, I see you wanted to comment.
Well, I just wanted to comment. Cindy made a point that I just wanted to accentuate. I think we come at this conversation differently. I think from the town side, I'll speak for myself. Well, from the developer side, I hear that we need to be flexible, nimble, and react to the market. You guys are going to build what you can sell. That makes perfect sense from your perspective. Just appreciate from our perspective, that's a bit scary, or it causes us to maybe pause. Do we in fact need to be always flexible and reacting to the market? Because presumably there's always some market to build to. And I think those of us on our side are thinking about how do we provide services to all these different types of dwellings and residents. And so maybe I'm stating the obvious, but just appreciate there's a totally different perspective when we come to this conversation.
Tom, I think I'm in your camp. I think that's where I was going with this, that
Okay.
we really need to think about, you know, what's taxing our services in the community, what's paying their own way, and what do we really, really need to accommodate either the labor force in our community or the new development that Rocky's doing at the Downs. You know, if he brings in high-paying tech jobs or Abbott Labs or something else, what do we need to do to support both residential and industrial and other kinds of development in this community? Because I think we can tailor the growth ordinance to meet the needs of the town as well as the developer. I mean, I think that open space is one of the things that we're hearing in this town right now that people need. That your ordinance addresses it. Is it enough? Have we really looked at what the town needs? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I failed to mention at the top, this crowd might be interested to know part of the work the staff is doing as we speak and will provide to the ordinance committee and full council is an analysis that is really driving at understanding what sorts of demands for service come with different housing types. And that work is ongoing and proving to be fairly challenging to really get a full picture of that. But that's a piece of the information we think is critical to this conversation. So that's ongoing, and we think within the month or so, we'll have some results to share.
There's one thing I'd like to mention, because I think oftentimes with these discussions, we get a little too microcentric. Scarborough is not Peaks Island. You don't have to take a ferry to get to it. And you have neighboring towns. So what we decide in Scarborough, what folks in Saco decide to do, or in South Portland, it's very transportable. So I don't think you can necessarily manage your growth by just limiting growth permits. And people are going to drive through Scarborough. People are going to work there, but not live there but not work there. And one of the dangers that I often see is we try to maybe create an environment that's artificial. And I just want to, as we talk about growth permits, it's not like South Portland or Saco or Gorham necessarily are going to stop growing as well.
Right.
So I just put that out there. You can't control everything. And sometimes I think we try to micromanage this stuff.
Okay. Carrie, I know I didn't finish with you. Are you all set? Did you have any thoughts yourself on numbers of perm or just the numbers thing? I don't want to be too linear with this either. I think this is good, the conversation we're having.
Yeah, well, I have a few things I want to talk about. I, like Elliot, didn't have the chance to really go through the growth management ordinance. I do remember back in the early 2000s when growth was pretty heavy and the growth management ordinance was put in effect.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves where we are today. But prior to getting on this call, I did kind of scan down through it. And if I look at it on number 3, purpose, and going down to D, it says to avoid circumstances in which the rapid development of new residences, potentially housing many families with school-age children, would outpace the town's capability to expand its schools and other necessary services soon enough to avoid serious school overcrowding and a significant reduction in the level and quality of other municipal services. So when you talk about fairness, I think it's important for me to give you my 2 cents, because one of the projects that I'm developing, Eastern Village, doesn't have kids, hardly at all. I think there's maybe 3 families down there, and we've got about 110 homes built. Most of the people we're getting are retired or semi-retired. So from the standpoint of impacting the schools, next to none. Likewise, building apartments that are 1 bedrooms and studios, and you have the same thing there. There's not school-age kids that are being brought into the municipal campus, school campus. I think out of 1 project we've done, we've had 1 lady who they had a baby and she was there for about 6 months, and then obviously they moved on. So the ordinance right now isn't addressing those particular situations. We're talking about pure fairness. There are other projects that aren't having that same, impact, what have you. And the other thing I'd say is we've got a project right now that we got approved last year. We're getting ready to start. We pulled the permits that we could get last year for that project, pulled the permits we've gotten this year for that project, then we can get, and we still don't have enough permits to build the project out. It's 84 units. It's on 12 acres. The tight site, a lot of site construction that will go on. I don't think it serves anybody's interest, whether it's the neighbors, the town, the developer, to take 3 years to build that project out because they can't get permits.
Mhm.
So,
And Carrie, when you say neighbors, I'm sorry, Carrie, when you say neighbors, just for the general public who may be tuning in, you're talking about the fact that there's construction going on around their house for 3
Yeah, I mean,
years, as opposed to getting it all done at once. Is that what you're talking about there?
right, the roads leading into the project also get you to North Village, which is the project I'm talking about. It's around other single-family homes. The obviously buildings that will be within the development, which will have people living there. They're just going to be, if you can imagine it, 3 years of construction activity going on. It just doesn't make any sense. And especially when you consider the fact that you're going to be lucky to have any school kids there at all.
Okay.
So I think it needs to be looked at from the standpoint of, having lots in a project, I think everybody knows here that as a developer, you spend, millions of dollars putting infrastructure in. You do that with the understanding that you're going to be able to build within the project, get your money back, make some money. So I think it also is really difficult to wrap your head around that you make that investment. You hope that the growth ordinance will be there to get you a permit. And at the same time, I don't think the town stops collecting taxes on those lots. So, you're paying taxes on lots that now you can't even build on. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be talked about. I've got a lot of concerns. I still don't have the permits that I need this year, and the town's already maxed out. If I go and I look at the growth ordinance, or not the growth ordinance, but the permits that were pulled from 2010 to 2019, obviously you can see where the economy was not doing as well and where we are today. Like Elliot said, you're going to have periods where the town is going to see more growth than other years when it's not going to have that same growth. We're in a very difficult situation right now. We've got historic low interest rates.
Yeah.
Money is so cheap. We've also got COVID, which we're seeing a lot of pressure from people that now realize they don't have to be in a certain location to make a living. They can be anywhere as long as they've got, high-speed internet, and that's changing a lot of the dynamics. So here we are, 135 permits, January 21st, gone. And people like myself and probably others on this call are wondering, all right, well, what do we do now? Yeah, that's where I'm at.
And to Carrie's point, which I think is excellent, is that you can't bankroll property. It's just too expensive to hold if we can't develop it. So
Right.
there has to be a balance there as well. And I look across the top of my screen and I think everybody is doing such different types of development. I think we're really fortunate in the town to have the diversity that we have in these developers that are right here that you're just talking to today, which is a small sampling. The other issue is, don't we have a declining population in our schools? I mean, it would seem to me that is not a relevant conversation in terms of growth control today. And correct me if I'm wrong, but.
Yeah, we're working on getting that number and the trending. But I'm going to hold that thought, Cindy, if that's okay.
Okay.
The
Yeah, it's
schools,
fine.
that is a major thing that was the driving force behind the original GMO, or one of the major driving forces.
Yes.
Rocky, do you and then Joe, I'm going to get to you after Rocky, if that's okay. I apologize.
It's fine. Someone has to be last.
But not least, right?
So I'm going to try to go back to your original question, which was directly about issue number one and my thoughts on the number. I believe is what you're looking for, the number of build permits at 135. I personally am very disappointed to hear you say that not having a growth management ordinance is off the table and we don't want to talk about that, because I'm very convinced that there's no reason in the world to actually have this. The town can't show need to have this. But that being said, I know that when the growth management ordinance originally went in place, we had the numbers to prove that the original number should have been 225. We agreed with the council and allowed 135 to go. Because we cut a deal that this was supposed to go away in between 3 and 5 years. That's what was supposed to happen. So I think the 135 is highly unfair. I think if the goal of the council is to make an exclusive town where all walks of life cannot come to live, then 135 works perfectly. And that's my feeling. And I don't want to get too far off in a tangent. I will say that I am up on the wheel on the growth management ordinance. I have had my head in this thing since this committee started talking about it a few months ago. I don't think most of the other developers have, because they've been lulled into a sense of safety and not worried about it, because we've never run up against the fact that we've run out of road permits. And that was because of market forces. It's the only reason we haven't bumped up against it until 2020. The end of 2020, we ran out of growth permits in October, and it hurt builders. They had to wait, and it didn't make any sense to me at that time. But that's my feeling.
Rocky, I'm just gonna play a devil's advocate with you just real briefly, everyone here with me. What would be the good thing about the growth management? Anything?
I think the good thing about the growth management ordinance, when it went in place, it was a good thing for the town of Scarborough, because it did give the town the time to take a pause, and that's what it was supposed to be. Pause, let's look at our ordinances, let's look at our impact fees, and let's develop ordinances and impact fees that will serve the town, so that we don't get into a situation where growth is overburdening. And at the time, it was primarily the school system, but it was in general overburdening the town. And so over time, that is exactly what happened. Comprehensive plans were worked on. Zoning ordinances were worked on and changed and improved, and really directed the types of growth, directed developers to be building the types of growth that don't hurt the town, like what we were typically building was a 4-bedroom colonial. We've been steered away from that as builders. So that was a benefit. The town also took the time to do studies and look closely at impact fees, and they've adopted impact fees. There's an impact fee on many items now that this town never had, and many other towns still do not have. But I firmly believe that new development is more than paying its fair share in impact fees, and then when you actually get the product built and it's taxed, it's more than covering its cost. So that's why I feel so passionately about that.
Okay, Joe. Thank you, Rocky.
Yeah, I agree with a lot that has been said earlier, Kerry, and certainly Rocky. I was shocked when I heard that the permits are gone for this year. Does that mean there's no permits available for single family or growth permits for single family homes? And I see people nodding.
Yes, that is correct.
Well, on your memo that was sent out, item number 2, to ensure fairness in the allocation of building permits. Where did they go so quickly? I pulled my permits last year for Tucker Brook, but I do have other lots in Scarborough that we've been talking to potential buyers on. And it sounds like there's no sense in my talking to them if I can't build. So I think there should be a fairness in allocating these. A separation possibly of new construction for single family homes versus the apartments. And I'm hearing that the apartments are taking most of the permits, even though they're not overburdening the schools and the infrastructure. So I certainly feel as though there should be some adjustments made in the number allocated for single family residents.
Tom, I have to bail out for 5 minutes here.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm going to let him run it. I'll be right back. I have to deal with something. Thank you.
Could I ask a question, Tom, of Jay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair.
Go ahead, Joe.
Where did all these permits go so quickly? Could you give us an idea of where they went?
Jay has a good handle of that. Do you think that's a wise use of our time right now?
Yeah,
Or
I
could
mean,
you give
Well,
us?
it might help us to determine if the ordinance is decent, if it should be amended,
Well,
changed.
before Jay speaks, this has never happened before. So I suspect it's partially a phenomenon of running out for the first time last October and folks being aware of that, approved projects, and a bit of a run on them to make sure that you have what you can so you can keep building. Keep in mind that these growth permits need to be converted into a building permit essentially within 9 months of issuance. So
Right.
it may be that some of the ones that are issued now aren't ultimately converted, but we'll have to wait 9 months to know that. So Jay, can you give us a quick overview of who's?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a quick overview. I have a spreadsheet that is public information, so we can certainly share that for anyone who makes that request. But I was actually doing a little bit of an analysis just leading into this. And I think some of what we've seen, there are some bigger projects that have pulled a number of permits. I think Elliott Chamberlain's moving into a couple of new phases, pulled a bunch of permits early. But when you look, and I'm just, not to pick on you, Elliot, but just a good example of some other projects where typically you'd see that project pull a similar number of permits throughout the 12 months. And I think, Leighton Farm is another good example of this. Normally they pull somewhere between 8 and 10 permits in a given year, or 8 and 12, whatever the case may be. And you can see in past years that those permits are pulled, a few in February, a few in March, June, again, throughout the months, where I think this year, given the fact that we ran out last year, understanding, as most of the folks at this meeting understand, that there's been a lot of discussion at the council level about what to happen with growth management. Seen a number of the projects come in early and grab the 10 or 12 they might grab throughout a given year, right at the outset of the year. And so one of the things I was interested in was this question that you just raised, Joe, was about sort of, the non-developer permits, if you will, those permits for for those folks who just have a piece of land that might want to build a single family. Last year, 11 of the growth permits, I think this number's right, I'm in the right order of magnitude anyway, 11 of the permits went to single families outside of subdivisions. This year,
Can I just ask people to mute themselves if you're not speaking? There's some feedback going on. I'm not sure from where.
I'm hearing that now.
Liam, is that YouTube being streamed at the same time?
Not for me.
Okay.
I'll go through and mute everyone else but Jay. And
so I guess I was just wrapping up. I was just going to say, last year we had 11 single family permits issued outside of subdivisions or developments. This year, 6 of the permits went to those type of houses. So I hope that starts to help to answer some of your question, Joe, without going through obviously project by project.
Yeah, and I was looking at the percent, 20% of the permits are allocated to one developer on one project. So that means that maybe 5 or 6 developers are going to take advantage of the growth permits and everybody else is excluded. So again, referring to item B on the memo, I think that we should look at, or you should look at a fairness appropriation of these permits to not just 5 or 6 people that are developing, but more of these people. I read the ordinance, and am I correct in assuming that there is an emergency fund for these people that might come in, the homeowners that bought home builders that bought a piece of land and want to come in, a one-time deal? Is there a provision for those people other than?
Well, I believe there's an opportunity for us to issue up to 5.
That's what I thought, Tom. That's what I thought, yeah. Well,
And that's at the discretion of the code enforcement officer, Jay, really.
Okay, then I interpreted correctly. But no, and Carrie's point is, it's tough for us to carry these projects if we can't get permits to build them out. And it's kind of penalizing us for doing a larger development like Rocky's doing and what Carrie's doing and Mark O'Leary. And
Okay.
it's, but all right, that's my point. So I'll sit back and listen to other comments.
I think we've worked through, Carrie, anything, last comment on this and we'll move on? You're muted. Carrie, you're muted.
sorry about that. Thank you. I do have a couple of other questions I'd like to ask when the time's right. Can sit back.
Yeah, why don't you hold that? I suspect there'll be an opportunity maybe at this next point. Kind of interlaced in this discussion we've just had, we've been talking about total number of permits in the allocation was the question. There's also this reserve pool that sits off to the side. And I think Jay's explained how that pool is accessed. So this next issue relates to the reserve pool. And so we'd like to get input from all of you about that issue. I guess I'll start with how you appear on my screen. Mark?
Hi, Tom. It doesn't seem like everybody would be subject to that reserve pool.
It's true, purposely.
Yep. That and make it available to everybody, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the design, and maybe we missed the mark, the design was to favor certain types of projects and give them access to the pool.
Understood. But I'd go back to the same sense that to me, a unit is a unit, and that's for anyone. I think Carrie hit a lot of this on the head. Hopefully there is a change in some of the pieces of this equation.
Okay. Elliot. You're muted.
Sorry. You talking strictly the 5 overflow or the entire pool?
This is the reserve pool that was 500 is now 111, and there's basically 3 or 4 ways to access that.
I mean, I don't have a lot of familiarity because we're not, we wouldn't have access to that in our neighborhood or the projects we've been doing. I like the idea of a reserve pool for specialty projects. As you know, it takes a long time to go through a large project, get it through all the state agencies, local agencies, and to get there and then find out you don't have a permit just because you showed up, a week late or didn't know what was going on in the town. Doesn't seem right. So I personally like the idea that certain projects would have access to that reserve pool. I wonder if it could be, if there's a way to expand who could use it a little bit without completely opening it completely up. So, but I like it there. I like the fairness of it. I like it that it certain projects can use it.
Good. Okay. Good input. Thank you. Joe Fristacci.
I think the reserve pool is good, but again, it's how one might access it. And again, I go back to the point that if all the residential, and I do single family residential property, so that's where I'm coming from with this. What do I do if I have a buyer that wants a house built in Pleasant Hill on a lot that I own?
Right.
Do I wait until next year and get in line the day after New Year's? I think that there should be some type of exception for single family home builders.
And when you say that, Joe, you're really talking about kind of the not a subdivision, kind of the one-off, right? Someone building a
yes,
lot.
yeah.
Okay.
But even still, I mean, I think I'm looking at this and I think that maybe there should be the separation between permits for new construction and permits for apartments.
Okay. Good. Carrie.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the reserve pool is a good thing to take up the, kind of be that shock absorber, if you will, from the times when the growth is pretty heavy to the times when it isn't. So it's always got something that's there, which is obviously why it's called a reserve pool. I think that maybe it should be put together in 2 forms too. There should be something for single family people like Joe who have a legitimate point, and also something for projects that clearly don't impact the municipal services, the schools, which obviously what this seems to be all about. I will make a point that Rocky has a pretty good memory. I do remember back when the ordinance was put in place, back in the 05, 04 timeframe. And I do believe that was the case. This was to give the town an opportunity to get their arms around it. I think probably, you know, from my standpoint, once we got that, what was originally going to be kind of a moratorium to something that we could all at least work with, that everybody kind of went on about their business, and we probably didn't focus maybe more like we should have. Norm probably did the town in addressing it, you know. But the other thing is, Jade, I have a question for you. Are the 55 and older projects pulling from the growth permits?
For the most part, yes. Again, it's a few of them are able to pull from the reserve account if they're affordable. It's not necessarily an age restriction. It's about affordability. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, so from a services standpoint, which we have obviously as one of the items in the growth ordinance and why this was enacted, they're not putting any services on the schools. So that seems to me like maybe that should be a separate area to pull from. But from an affordability standpoint, I also have another question. Well, I got another one for you, Jay, real quick. Are these growth permits transferable?
They can be, once they're purchased for a lot, they stay with that lot. And so we're sort of delving into where Robin and Brian Longstaff have a much more greater detail on those type of weeds. But my recollection of it is, if you buy it for a particular lot, you could sell it to me for that particular lot, but I couldn't buy it from you and take it to another lot elsewhere.
Okay. Well, you know, I've heard affordability mentioned, and I think, you know, everybody's interested in trying to find ways for more people to afford to live in a, you know, community that obviously is pretty costly to live in. The growth ordinance maxing out is going to do nothing to help the affordability factor, is only going to make it worse. And from the standpoint of the growth permits not being transferable, that's probably a good thing. Otherwise, I'd be on the phone after this meeting trying to figure out who I can buy growth permits for at the lowest price I'd be able to get them for, which obviously would probably be going up by the day once people find out about this. But yeah, I mean, Tom, I think the reserve pool is good. I think that it probably should be looked at in terms of delineating more specifically to Joe's concern, all of the people's concerns here, because everybody has different things, and obviously we're all kind of building different projects. But I have a feeling that, you know, we've got permits that are going for projects that aren't impacting the services, and maybe that's not exactly what it was for.
So I hear from you a general concurrence with the concept of a reserve pool, but perhaps expanding the ways to access it.
Right.
Okay. Ben Devine.
I guess I still laboring with what Rocky said is, what really is the purpose of the growth permits? If at the Beacon, probably have 400 people living there. I think there were 17 kids in school, but we paid a fortune for school impact fees. We don't use any services. We, you know, the trash is all consolidated. So, I mean, I think it's a winner for the town. So I guess, other than the fact that we have growth management.
And we're losing you. I wonder if you could just drop your video. Sometimes that... Ben,
why we talk about the real needs of the town? Maybe we adjust the impact fee. All right.
Ben, I'm sorry, we're having trouble. There we go. That's better. No, that's
Why
not working.
why don't you guys go on to somebody else? I'll
Okay,
listen.
we'll do.
I'll just listen.
We'll do. Rocky?
So when thinking about the reserve pool, I think the reserve pool is fine. Setting aside my thoughts that we don't need any of it, but the reserve pool acts or gives the town a way to direct growth to certain types of growth. And I think that's probably good, but you've pinched us by not allowing the rollovers to continue and having those available. So all of the years where we didn't use hardly any of the 135 permits, we lost them. They go away. They don't go, they're not available to us anymore. So this growth permit situation where you have them in a reserve pool, you have to have a certain type of project. Well, if the town wants to direct and get those types of projects, I guess that's fine to have that. But why did we lose the rollover?
Yeah, just to put a finer point on that, when the council recharged the reserve pool to 500 back in 2007, we did the analysis to really understand, had the rollover continued all those years, what would that have been? And it was a number about 715 or so, as I recall. So the 500 went a long way to kind of catching up, but it didn't get all the way there. That's
so
true.
You're right on the money, Tom. It didn't go all the way there. And you excluded all of your residential builders. You made that only available to people doing certain types of development.
Well, with
The
all due
Joe
respect,
Patchi's the world, it doesn't do anything for him. So
it was
that-
never, it's true. It was never designed to deal with Joe's slice of the development, the single family.
So frankly, I think that's unfair.
Okay. Cindy. Oh, you're mute. Liam, I wonder if you could light her up. And Jay, do you notice there's a question? I wonder if you could give some thought to that.
So, Tom, my take on this is that I don't think we have enough growth permits to get the development and support the development that we really need in the community. So I think that's one issue. The rollovers, they obviously serve specific types of projects. I'm not opposed to that. I think that you should expand the use for those, the reserve pool, so that you can use it either help a development that has to move forward for whatever reasons. I mean, we just can't start a development and halt it or stop it, or you got to make sure that you can complete what you're starting. You've heard that 3 times tonight, so I guess I don't have to make that point again. But I keep coming back to, what do we use the reserve pool for? Maybe we need to identify what that use should really be. And I wasn't prepared tonight to talk about that, but I don't think it would be a very difficult discussion once we took a look at it, tried to figure out where you would use it in an emergency situation. But I do think the overall fees, the overall permits should be expanded. I think it just comes back to traffic, and it comes back to schools in general conversations, and open space. Those are the only 3 things I hear about in town. I don't think we're addressing that either in the reserve pool or in the number of permits. So to answer the reserve pool, I think you expand the use of that in some way that makes sense.
All right. Well, I think we've completed it. Jean Marie, for your benefit, I'll try to summarize what I've heard, and forgive me, you won't all agree perfectly, but I hear general acceptance with the concept of a reserve pool, which benefits favored projects. But at the same time, there's interest in perhaps expanding how to access, what types of projects can access that pool.
And I heard something about changing the role. I apologize, everyone. I had to go deal with a last minute thing. Expanding the rollover, or changing that. In other words, allowing for carryover.
Yeah, that point was made. I will just remind everyone that in spite of the fact that the rollover went away for that middle decade, no permits were turned away. No permits were issued to everyone who wanted and needed one. And in fact, when the council recharged to 500, we still have 111 yet left. So I don't see what harm has been done by the fact that the rollover has gone away, frankly. Rocky? And I'm going to hand this back to you, Jean Marie, after this.
I'd like
Thanks.
to that one point, if I could, Tom. You're right. Nobody was turned away, but we don't have those permits stacked in a drawer waiting to be used. So we ran out. We just already run out. Those should be sitting there ready and available for us because the town determined that they could take growth of 135 a year. There were many years they didn't get that growth. So they benefited from not having any growth or very little growth those years. But overall, the average, we should have been able to handle that growth. So why can't we have it?
You're right. I was thinking that the rollover went from annual allocation rolled over into reserve pool, but that was not the way it was originally set up. So my apologies.
Okay. So where are we?
We're moving on to issue 3, which is the fractionalization.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one, I know, for counselors or some of the counselors. Dawn, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to reflect. I mean, I think it's been a great discussion. I really appreciate all the comments from the developers. But one thing I'd like to point out is it is interesting to me to note that so in 2000 we addressed fractionalization. We created that in response to demand or perception of demand, and 2007. Then 10 years later, we worked on the reserve pool also again to address demand. So I think it's interesting to note here we are, not another 10 or 20 years, another 3 years from the last adjustment. And we're dealing with the issue of how to forecast and manage demand. So I think it's, it does seem to me that we have over the years accommodated demand, but it's very interesting for me to hear the conversation and the pressure for more permits or more flexibility on permits. So I would just let it offer that as a perspective. It's not a fully developed opinion. It's just that is interesting to note.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I'm just going to throw this out there. Who from the development community has some thoughts on fractionalization and how it's helped or how it's hurt? Raise your hand. Go ahead, Rocky.
So I'm gonna cheat. Excuse me. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and just read from notes that Dan and I kind of put together specifically around fractional units. And I apologize, but I think I need to read this so I can hit the right points. So under fractionalized units, there's some perception that fractionalized units are leading to more residents and impacts. That's simply untrue. Regulating density using fractional units and using the same method the growth permits does, using the same method as zoning, growth permits does two important things. It coordinates the zoning with the GMO. Otherwise, the permits can't be used to move forward. So in other words, we could get projects approved under one set of rules, but we can't get permits to actually move it forward. So they have to be aligned. If the zoning ordinance recognizes fractional units, then the growth management ordinance has to as well. It also enables a revenue generating housing type. It allows us to build those units that we know, we've proved on paper, that make money for the town of Scarborough. They are not putting a burden on the schools or services. They're making money for the town of Scarborough. So it directs us to build those units as our zoning ordinance directs us. So this enables that revenue generating housing to occur in the town. It fixes the town's fiscal challenges. Lastly, based on the occupancy of 1 and 2 bedroom units, fractional units does not create more residents or impacts than if bedrooms were unlimited, like in single family houses. In other words, it's the fractional units were one of the smartest thing the town came up with in that zoning ordinance. It helped get developers to focus on that style of building because it's good for the town. And I think it's important that fractionalization has to stay. I'm not sure where the perception comes from that because one growth permit could actually produce 2 one-bedroom units, that you're winding up with more people. You're not. I think studies were done when the town went to fractionalization. They did a lot of work to show that that was the right move. It was moving the town in the right direction. I'm not sure why there are council members that don't agree with that. I suppose, people can disagree, but there was work done and it made sense at the time, and that's why that council moved that forward. So
Okay.
I think fractionalization has to continue.
Okay. Any other thoughts from developers? Reaction? I don't see any
Sorry,
here.
I don't work with this often here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're fair. I think that they're needed. We pay a lot of fees in town. There's no help from the sanitary district for a studio apartment, and a single family house that's 4,500 square feet, 5 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms pays the same fee. So when you're talking about fees that you pay, it helps you, or the density bonus helps in making projects feasible. But I also think that they pay their own fair share. They pay more than their fair share in some cases, and they're not generating kids. So I've been supportive of them. I work with them. They're part of the projects I'm working on, and I would not be in favor of seeing them go.
Okay.
And this is Cindy Taylor. I think that part of the growth ordinance is important because it brings diversification to the types of housing that we're creating here in town. I think there's been a lot of good points made. I hope there's someone taking really good notes or this is being recorded, because I think that the issues that have been talked about between a 4-bedroom house and a 1-bedroom apartment, we really need to be encouraging both in our community so that we have both and we meet all the needs and fairness to everybody. But I think the fractionalization, originally I think the growth ordinance was very well done when it was first brought to bear. I think we need to rethink it in terms of what our needs are today. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ben?
I would.
Elliot, go ahead.
I would like Carrie. I don't do a lot of it, but I 100% agree with Rocky and Cindy. It does create a diversity. It does bring in different types of people. To me, you can't have one type of people, one type of buyer in a town. You need to have the diversity from younger people, single, older people, married, kids. You need the whole diversity. I think the other thing it does is it creates development in areas where you want it to happen. You're not going to typically put projects that would use this on the outskirts of town. You're going to put it on where there's already current infrastructure, whether it's utilities or highways, whatever the case may be, in a place like the Downs. What a fantastic place to use this. So no, I am completely in favor of keeping this in place.
Okay. Ben, did you have your hand up?
I did. I've got a bad connection, so I'm just going to listen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other, Joe, you got an opinion on this, or Mark?
The only comment I might have is to reduce the impact on the number of growth permits is to reduce the calculation method. Instead of a 0.5 allocation or 0.5 multiplier for a 750 square foot house. I'm looking at the notes here. Reduce it down to a 0.25 or something. It is necessary, I believe, but I think you might relook at the calculation method.
Okay. Mark, do you have any input?
Yeah, another little piece of it, as was talking about 1 and 2 bedroom, if those are deeded senior, is that in any part of the equation where it's never going to change? In other words, you're not going to have a family move in with 3 children. I don't know if the deeded part makes any difference at all.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we've dealt with fractionalization. Do either of my counselors have a question or need any clarification on this part? Ken?
I don't need, I appreciate everybody coming. I'm listening intently.
Okay.
I'm learning from the developer side. I represent the resident side. So there's definitely a different part of this story that we're going to get to. But I'll wait till we get there.
Okay. I appreciate that. Dawn, do you have anything?
Nothing further, but I did want to point out there've been a couple of questions coming in on Q&A.
Yeah.
I got one, and then also I think, yeah, so I want to make sure we have a chance, if you think it's appropriate and you had planned on this, to have some public comment or some Q&A.
We're going to have time for
Outside.
I can't even talk, public comment when we get done with this section. Liam, was that the only one? It was from Marvin, who I know is sitting in the audience. Was that who you heard from, Dawn?
There was one other one. I didn't get Marvin's, but I did get one from David Walton, who had a question about permits.
Okay, can you hold those till the end? We'll get to those. Well, I will definitely address those.
Yeah, we have those.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thank
All right. I'm glad people are weighing in here. All right. The next.
Jean-Marie, you're off. You're mute.
That's an unusual thing. Me mute. Okay. Let's go to issue 4. Stop laughing at me, Joe. Ordinance Committee asked for input on related to questions about allocations of permits by project. Tom, can you remind me
just to put a finer point to this, the current growth management ordinance limits no more than 20% of the annual growth permits may be issued to any one subdivision or development. Effectively, that limits or equates to 27 growth permits. And quite frankly, developers, many of you in this call are aware of this and have found ways to deal with it, such that there are multiple subdivisions, for instance, as a way to get multiple access to the annual allocation. So staff sees this as something that the actual practice is probably not meeting with the intention or the legislative intent of this. And this is an area that we think ought to be tightened up a bit. That's why it's an issue that's up for discussion.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and if I've read the GMO correctly, it's not by developer, it's by per se, it's by like LLC or whatever.
It says the language is any one subdivision or development. So there's some flexibility that has perhaps been, I won't say exploited, that's too strong a word, but I think that the intent of this is not really being borne out in practice.
Okay.
And Tom, I'll just, if I could on that, I do think, just to date, so the question that was asked on the chat was, how many permits has the Downs received to date? And so I was doing a quick analysis, and I think it was last year. Last year pulled about 60 growth permits, might have been just a couple under. This year they were able to pull about 35. And as you said, Tom, it's because there are these different subdivisions within the project. I think Carey's is another good example of that, where you have North Village as a separate, it's part of Eastern Village, what might be considered a common scheme of development, but they're different subdivisions. And so to date, I think, the 60 number occurring in the Downs is sort of the biggest number we've seen, but I don't know that we have yet sort of seen But I will say, I have had some conversations. My phone has been ringing off the hook over the last 2 weeks, and particularly in the last couple of days. Started to have some conversations where there are folks who are thinking about some projects that are sort of in having an aha moment and have said to me, well, if I'm looking to do a project of X size and I just do, 5 separate subdivisions, I could come in and grab 20% with all 5. And my response to that has been technically true, completely not the intent of the ordinance. And so I think that's the discussion that Tom and I have at least started to very briefly have, just around being sure we sort of try to articulate that intent. Because I think there are some projects that have come along that clearly are of a size that weren't originally contemplated in 2000, 2001 when this ordinance was adopted, and then back in 2007, 2008 when it was most recently refreshed, I'll say. There really hasn't been a thorough review of the ordinance in total in that time. So I think we've definitely seen projects come along that are of a different scale and scope. So just something to think about as we progress.
Okay. Feedback, input from developers on this. Anybody? Elliot's smiling.
Oh, geez, I thought Rocky would be the first one to jump in here. I'm struggling with this one because I can see, I feel for, say, the Downs, where, obviously I can probably guess as to how deep they are into this at the beginning of a project and going through what was probably an incredible DEP process, incredible DOT. Then he's got to live with a time frame on his DOT permit. That's a tough one. So you put yourself out there that far, myself, Carrie, Joe, and yet we're treated exactly the same way as a 10 unit or a 15 unit subdivision. They can grab 100% of their project where we can just grab small portions of it. And yet we have way more risk. We've been approved for a long time. And once you're approved, you're just thrown back into this. You're the same as everybody else. But at the same time, obviously you can't have it so one project can end up taking, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the number of permits either. So I'm struggling with this one. I don't know what the fair answer is. I would love to hear, from the other developers as to what, but I think there has to be some, either a treatment on the size of the project or some favorability towards developments that have put so much infrastructure, so much time and money invested into getting that off the ground to have an availability to those permits.
Okay. Rocky?
So I'll jump in. I think that, when the growth management ordinance was put in place, no one ever contemplated projects like the Downs or like, what Kerry and Elliot are doing with their projects even. None of that was contemplated. I mean, a huge project in Scarborough was 40 units back when this was put in place. So that's, it was really set up to address that. I think the GMO needs to handle modern mixed owner projects. The Downs, I mean, everybody thinks that it's, Rocky and his brothers and the two Mishu boys that are doing the Downs. There are many, many development entities and many different partnership situations that are working on the Downs. So, the town, I don't see how the town could say, well, you can only have this much, for the Downs. I don't know. It just seems, it seems unnecessary and it seems antiquated the way it's written right now. And I think it has to change because it doesn't work.
Yeah, this was intended, I'm sure, to get to the fairness issue, to make sure that there was enough to go around to those that needed and wanted them.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any of the other developers?
Certainly seems to me.
Hold on, Cindy. Mark?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I certainly believe that the bigger developments like the Downs, like Beacon, Carey's project, absolutely, they have to be protected to some degree, or you're not going to ever get that type of development in this town. With that said, I don't know if a quarterly thing works, but I think you've got to allot enough that keeps everybody chugging along. I certainly wouldn't want to take on something that's as big as some of those and not have the idea if I was going to be able to build out in 3 years and what I thought I could do in 2 or 1. It all still comes back to the same thing of guaranteeing enough permits, period. So if I'm getting this right, anything that January 21st that's approved in this town, the rest of this year, even if it was close to being approved, would not have a shot at permits. Am I correct in that?
As the ordinance sits today, the good news is, Mark, the council is rolling up its sleeves and intends to make modifications to the growth management ordinance. So that process is underway. Presumably, this reality will help, I don't know if it informs, but be considered as part of that discussion and what they do in the end.
Mhm.
So I expect there'll be action taken certainly before the end of the year.
First of all, I applaud everything you guys are doing. At least we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
And before I forget, and there's various issues for the vaccination center that they put out there. That's
Oh,
huge for this
yeah.
area.
Yeah.
So.
And
Absolutely.
how do we sign up, right?
Cindy, I'm sorry, we kind of crossed wires there. So you had something that you wanted to add?
Well, it just seems to me that, the growth ordinance definitely needs to go back and be revamped. And this particular GMO part is just another example of that. But it seems so unfair that people pay so many taxes and then go through the process, not only the local approval process, but as was pointed out here, if you go to the DEP and you've got a limitation on your approvals, people need to have an expectation that they can move ahead. So we either have to, we need to modify the ordinance for density in building, or when we approve something, we've got to make sure that you are protecting the interests of everybody, the town and the developer. So I applaud you for looking at this. I think the first attempt was great. I think we're in a different situation. We have so much pent up demand because we haven't been able to fill it as we pointed out, 2008 was a terrible downturn. The last year has been a horrible situation. And it's fortunate that Rocco has been able to move his development forward. I applaud him for that. I think it's a credit to the community. So I hope that we can just look at these individually, every one of these issues you've asked us to look at tonight, and really think about what's the best thing and the best way to handle it. So it just seems like it's time to update it.
One thing that struck me, and this is from the non-developer, but I look at and I think about Carey's project and Elliot's projects. Those things came online within a couple of years of each other, so to speak, right? It's taken you, and it'll take you probably 15 years to kind of work through, maybe 20 years by the time you build out. So there's from a pace of growth, there's a practical pace of development, particularly when you're building single family. Then you add in this phenomenon of multifamily where you're putting 12 units under one roof. So you're building it, practically speaking, at a much faster pace than you do for single family. And then I think about what Rocky's done in the first phase. They build 30 single family homes in 14 months, just unprecedented. So we've got pace of growth and also kind of the practicality of actually swinging the hammer and putting the nails in. What I've heard today, one of the things that's resonated is kind of our growth management ordinance needs to recognize kind of the modern development and the different types of development. It's I think a good point that I'm taking away from this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I do want to be mindful of people's time because we've been at this now for 90 minutes and we do have some public comment. We do have one last thing, and Jay, I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to read. I've been all tied up all afternoon. Read your email about this issue 5. It's supposed to say what about moratoria?
Yeah, apparently, I'll apologize for the memorandum that was put out online. Something hiccuped between the conversion from Word to PDF, but the issue is supposed to be stated as the ordinance committee asked for input related to the consideration of a moratorium. The response that is in the memo that was online is correct, but it was just sort of the issue was misstated. So if you read that and couldn't make sense of why the same question was asked twice, that's what happened.
Okay, and just for my own edification, and I'm sure if I'm thinking this, other people may, the state has some pretty clear boundaries, should I say, around when towns can say, hey, no more building. Because we do have that natural friction between, you know, towns and, oh my God, we don't want to get overburdened with services, but the right of people to develop their property rights. And Jay, is that correct? So that's what you've stated here about moratoriums can be given for one of 2 reasons: prevent a shortage or overburden of public facilities, and application of existing policies is inadequate to prevent serious harm in an area, and that they're limited to 180 days. I know I'm shortening much longer state statute. Am I correct, Jay?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
I was echoing and paraphrasing state statute. Surprisingly, state statute on moratoriums is actually fairly short itself, but
Okay.
that is paraphrasing that. Yeah.
Okay. Any, I'll be honest with you, I'm not looking for a moratorium. That's not my idea of a good time, but developer feelings on this? Thoughts? Rocky?
I was just going to say that it's very clear that there's no need for a moratorium in this town. We have proper zoning ordinances in place. We have impact fees in place. And as I said earlier, I truly believe that new construction, new homes, new apartments are more than paying their fair share. And so this, in my mind, there's clearly no need for a moratorium.
Okay. Any of you other folks have thoughts? Want put something on the record on that? Not seeing any hands.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
Rocky's. Okay, go ahead, Elliot, and then Rocky.
No, Rocky, go ahead and finish.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Rocky.
All I was going to say is the fact that we no longer can get a growth permit as of today has put a moratorium on this town. So there's going to be some building for the people that did get some permits, but no one else can get it. And so here we are making it very exclusive, and we have a moratorium on that.
Okay, Elliot, go ahead.
And I'll keep it short. I agree with everything Rocky just said. I completely disagree with any need for a moratorium. I think the town of Scarborough has done an amazing job managing growth as far as services needed. It has been a strong growing town for a lot of years. Obviously, we went through a phase from 08 to 15 where you didn't talk about growth much. But the town's done an amazing job to manage that. We have a great tax mill rate. We have great services in the town, a great school system. As Rocky said, we're already limited to the 135. In a sense, that did put a moratorium for the rest of this year. I think most of the developers on here would agree. When you look at the numbers, we all think that number should be much higher than it is now. We all think the rollover should have always been in there. And we can argue whether it was or wasn't, but I don't think it was because it only went to certain projects. It should have been opened up more. If the town thinks 135 as an average is okay, then we should be able to do 135 as an average. You're never going to be able to, over a long period of time, do the exact same number. We probably will this year and next year. We did last year. but we're not going to ride this wave for another 10 years. Rates at some point are going to go back up. Demand at some point is going to start to wane a little bit. One of the things I'm amazed in this town is, and I think Cindy said it, there's great diversity just on this Zoom call on who's here, with what Rocky's doing, Carrie's doing, Joe's doing, Cindy's doing, what I've got happening at Dunstan. There's a lot of diversity where, again, you look back 20 years, it was the dead end road to a cul-de-sac with a half-acre lot with a 4-bedroom colonial on it. And that was 99% of what got built in this town, what Rocky, from probably the 70s up through the 2000s. Since 2000, with the change in zoning, with the growth management ordinance, with the ability, this fractional use, we've seen more diversity in the last 20 years than this town has seen in the 60 previous to that. So we've done a lot of things right. That's been an input of a lot of people. To all of a sudden see a high demand on permits and the word moratorium come up just when the one time there's a high number of permits, or what some people think is a high number, is, in my opinion, absolutely the wrong way to go.
Okay. Anyone else?
I would just add, Gene, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
The Scarborough, at one point there were a lot of office development was going to happen, retail development that's going to happen. We're in a cycle now where those projects are decades. I don't know if big office parks will exist or big shopping centers will exist. So, it's not just residential that puts services on. So Scarborough's a wonderful place to live, but it is a diverse economy. And there is a tax base that residential is serving that office parks and retail won't do in the future. So careful what you wish for. Try to limit really strong tax beneficial projects.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Anyone who hasn't spoken on this yet, other than counselors? I'm going to go with the developers. Anyone else have anything to say? Dawn, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Otherwise, I'll cut off my video. Can you hear me?
Now, yeah, there's no echo now. There was.
So I'm sorry I'm making this comment at the end of the discussion about moratorium, but the reason that it presented it.
Dawn, go ahead and cut your video. Thank you.
How about now? Can you hear me better? So the reason, for a little context, I wanted to say the reason for the comment about moratorium was this. The fact of the matter is, a couple of people who got elected to council in the fall, ran on the topic of development, concerns about development, the pace of development, intensity, and so forth. So, and this moratorium question had been knocked around. So we weren't really offering that as a solution. It's really kind of at one end of the spectrum. So I just wanted to reassure people that, number one, and number two, that, even if we were to do something like that, it's something that would have to be very narrow and very limited. So I think there are a range of other things we can study, but I appreciate the conversation, and the points made by the developers, all really helpful and valid. So thank you.
Yeah. And I would echo what Dawn said. I mean, and it was a year ago in the fall, Dawn, where you had I think that was more than this year, but I don't know.
Time flies.
Oh yeah, it does. All right. Very quickly, Liam, did you put up? Let's go to can we go to the, raise your hand if you are an attendee and have something to say. I see Mr. Cooper.
So, Mr. Cooper, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to offer your comment.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Hi, guys. My name is Patrick Cooper, and I'm a broker at Caldwell Banker Realty. I'm a former builder and contractor myself. Great conversation today, especially with all of the contractors and developers out here. All good stuff. I personally represent some people in Scarborough that, some clients in Scarborough that have smaller subdivisions. And as Elliot said, that, that used to be what Scarborough traditionally was, these small developments with dead ends and, a colonial on them. There's still a fair amount of that out there. And the situation, I thought I was on top of it this year, knowing that permits ran out last year. I still had no idea the permits would be gone by the 20th of January. It just seemed crazy to me. So that being said, I currently have one subdivision that is smaller than 10 lots out there. And I have a multitude of builders and developers that are interested in it all of a sudden. And obviously we have no land nor residential housing out there to speak of much right now in the pool. That being said, this is a subdivision that, and I've got a couple others that I'm looking at too, but this happens to be one that is fully approved. It was a major ordeal through DEP, even though it's not huge. It was a major ordeal through DEP and getting through the town. And it has been fully approved for about a year or so. The fact that there is, it's the same thing that goes along with you bigger developers. The fact that a smaller person has invested in that property, has split it all up into individual lots, so they are paying a significant amount of taxes on it. The soft costs alone between engineering and everything else, legal fees and et cetera, are significant for a small size property. The fact that they cannot get a permit until 2021 and they have interested people to buy it. And the reason they are interested is because it's a turnkey property. And as you all developers know, sometimes that can be huge. You don't have to buy a piece of property and go through the whole process to do all the soft costs, engineering and legal and et cetera. This particular client is now locked out until 2021 minimum. I do feel that this is a very unfair situation in that, first of all, I understand the town is not in the business of relaying to individual owners when and how they can get permits. But if they're not going to do that, I think there needs to be a pool out there of some sort for these people that have approved subdivisions that are smaller than the amount of the 20% or 27 permits available. It feels like a very inequitable dispersion of permits, and it truly puts an undue hardship on these owners. I just don't think it's a fair situation. I think that really needs to be looked at, and I think it needs to be looked at this year, not for next year. I think that there needs to be a conversation among the counselors at this point to make sure that this is not an unfair, undue hardship on these owners at this point. So I do appreciate all of the conversation with all you guys today. It was very interesting, and there are some great things going on out there. I love what's going on with the Downs. I love what you've been doing, Elliot, and same thing goes with you, Carrie. There's a lot of great stuff going on out there. So thanks again, and I'll let you guys talk about it.
Thank you, Patrick. Anyone else in the immediate audience? I see Marvin and Jay. I'm assuming that Patrick was speaking to you, for you.
When you say Jay, do you mean Jay Chapmas?
Yes, Jay Chapmas. Yes, sorry. All right, Liam, what do we have for online questions or comments?
The messages so I guess there was the one that Councilor Hamel picked up. I don't know if we want to take that one first. That was actually submitted through the Q&A.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So we already answered that one, Jay, the question of how many growth permits does the Downs project require?
I feel like I addressed that. That was my intent. Yeah. And as I said before, our spreadsheet on growth permits is a publicly available document. So
there was a question from Mr. Gates via email. What about the growth cap? And isn't the reserve pool a way around the growth cap? So I'm not sure if Jay, you want to take that question.
I guess I'm a little confused by the question, and I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Gates separately. The growth cap is our growth management ordinance. That is the annual allocation of 135 units. The reserve pool is, as already been talked about, it explicitly set aside for certain projects to enable those to move forward without having to dip into the annual allocation. So I don't know if you consider that a, excuse me, a workaround or whatever the language was, or it's an explicit component to the growth management ordinance.
And then just a public comment from Mr. Gates. A number of big projects have been approved or are in review stage. And when they come online, it's going to have a big effect on roads, police, fire, safety, traffic, and quality of life. These are already stressed by current growth. Again, just a comment.
Okay. And is that it?
That's all I've received via email and that I see in the Q&A and chat.
Okay. I guess we're ready to wrap up unless I missed something. Did I miss anything, Mr. Hamill or Mr. Johnson? Nope. Nope. They're shaking their heads. All right.
I have a comment though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Madam Chair. Hey, I want to thank everybody for coming. Really appreciate great feedback. This video is going to be mandatory watching by every counselor. I represent the other side. I represent the residents. Okay. GMO is to manage the pace of the growth, not what the growth is, not where the growth is. It's the pace of growth. And if you just look at a couple stats, last 5 years, 1,500 new dwellings in the town of Scarborough, 14% increase in population, 19% increase in traffic. I don't know of one resident that would agree that we need to increase the permits so you folks, and understandably, it is your profession, can build more. So somewhere along the line, there's a balance, and that's what we're going to strive for. And that's why I think there was some great feedback from you. I could definitely hear an unfair distribution of folks. People like Joe should not be getting shut out, but we're not going to do that. Again, I'm only one counselor of 7, so anything I say is my opinion. I would assume that we're not going to do that by increasing the permits. But again, going to take all this information back to the ordinance and have some pretty robust discussions. And hopefully, maybe you can join and watch those workshops, because I think you'll see some of the fruits of the labor, both with the ordinance and taking some of your input. So, thank you.
Dawn, did you want to say anything?
No, just echo the comments that Ken made. He's right. We do represent, other interests, and frankly, they're of equal importance to those of developers. So it's really a balancing act, and I think that we're going to be open-minded and try to understand where the real pressure points are, and we'll move forward accordingly. So, but thank you for your feedback. It was very, very clear and very specific. Thanks.
I also want to thank all of you for coming and offering. It was, I felt it was fruitful, and I apologize again that I had to leave temporarily, and I will follow up with Mr. Hall as to what I missed. Please know that we want to keep all of you involved, and it's not just this group, it's all developers. And I hear the concerns, and as someone who's in real estate myself, I understand the dynamics of what's going on right now in the market in many ways. So thanks. And do I have a motion? I know it's a workshop, but it's it's regular ordinance committee. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Mr. Johnson?
Yes, please.
Mr. Hamill?
Yes.
Ms. Katerina says yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And